Good morning. My name is Sandra Solin. I am the head of Northern Colorado Legislative Alliance, which is the joint public policy arm of the Fort Collins, Loveland, and Greeley Chambers of Commerce, as well as One NOCO and Upstate Colorado Economic Development. And we're thrilled to have you join us today for our continuing conversation on key issues affecting the Northern Colorado region. And energy, of course, is high in that category of issues affecting the region. In recent months, we've seen a considerable change in our landscape, and the oil and gas energy and sector has had a triple whammy effect as a consequence of many factors that have been in play, from public policy and regulatory decisions being made, the pandemic itself, and then also various geopolitical price wars and so forth in the sector. And the interconnection of our Northern Colorado regional economy as well as the state's economy is so dependent upon what happens in this sector. And so grateful for the time that our panelists are taking to join us today to share their perspectives on the state of oil and gas in Colorado and its interconnectedness, of course, with not only our region, but the state as a whole. We have joining us today Dan Haley from the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, Barb Kirkmeyer, Weld County Commissioner, Doug Dennison, who's with High Point Resources, Rich Werner from Upstate Colorado, and Jack Hamlin with Energy Strong. We're going to start off today with Dan Haley, but I should, just from a housekeeping perspective, we'll have time at the end for questions and answers. I encourage those who have questions of the various panelists to either put them in the chat or in the Q&A portion of the webinar bar at the bottom, and we'll moderate those questions as we get to that segment of our discussion today. So I invite you to do that. I'm going to introduce each one of our panelists ahead of their section. So I won't go into a whole lot of detail on each one at this point, but we'll share with you a little bit more about each one of these as we enter into their segment of the panel discussion. So we're going to start with Dan Haley, and he again serves as the president and CEO of COGA, Colorado Oil and Gas Association. He's responsible for leading the industry in Colorado legislative, regulatory, and public relations matters. Previously, he was with the Denver Post for 13 years, and he was the editorial page editor and was also the director of corporate communications for CoBank and also worked for EIS Solutions. He's a Colorado native and has a bachelor's degree from the University of Wyoming and sits on the advisory council to the USO Denver, as well as the Colorado Advisory Committee for U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, which I find really interesting. Dan, it's been such a pleasure to work with you over the last couple of years, and I'm thrilled to have you join us. Love to hear your thoughts on the current state of oil and gas.
Yeah, sure. And thank you, Sandra. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for all that you and your group does for our industry, certainly in Northern Colorado, but throughout the whole state. So thank you for everything. It has been a trying time for our industry and for our state too. You know, unemployment is up. The private industry is struggling. When the private industry struggles, government begins to struggle. And so we're not immune to any of that in the oil and gas industry. When people are driving less, it affects us. When people are traveling less, it affects us. And our industry has experienced layoffs and a few bankruptcies, but really we persevere through all of this. Colorado's oil and natural gas employees have been working out in the field throughout this entire pandemic in their home offices across the state, supplying the energy that we all need every single day. The governor in March declared oil and gas employees essential employees, which was a very important step, saying that they're working on critical infrastructure, which they absolutely are. But again, these are difficult times. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Not only are we dealing with coronavirus as human beings and as an industry, that has decreased the demand for the product that we produce every single day. But we also got caught in the middle of a battle between Saudi Arabia and Russia. And the two countries were in a price war, and they began oversupplying global markets. So you have demand going down during this pandemic, two large world actors oversupplying the market, and you see oil prices plummet. In mid-April, the numbers actually went negative for the first time ever. So unprecedented what we're dealing with right now. This morning, the barrel of oil Cost of barrel of oil is about $40. Beginning of the year, it was $65. So again, we've seen that price come up a little bit. It's stabilizing around 40. Would love to see that jump up a little bit more. Make no mistake in any of this. The price war that was going on was Russia and Saudi Arabia trying to break the back of the American shale revolution. Because we're the largest producer of oil and natural gas in the world right now. So we can't let that happen. And I think one of the largest lessons we've seen from the coronavirus is the need for that efficient and reliable domestic energy supply. Can you imagine being quarantined at home, not having access to energy as you have other countries trying to harm the United States? That would be a bad thing. So we really saw that need for energy security come out throughout this whole process. I think at the price that we see for oil today, you're going to see less drilling across the country. There are currently 258 rigs in the United States. Last July, there were 1,000 across the country. So 258 now. You're certainly seeing less production here in Colorado. We have 5 rigs running in the state right now, 4 in the Denver-Julesburg Basin, which is there in Weld County and areas around Weld County, and 1 in the Piceance on the western slope. Earlier this year, we had about 20 rigs running. Last year, before Senate Bill 181, which I'll talk about a little bit, before it was signed, we were in the 30s. And 5 years ago, we had 77 rigs running across the state. So 5 today. So we have more rulemakings happening in downtown Denver than we have rigs running across the state. More rulemakings right now than rigs. Rigs are much more efficient these days, so we don't need as many of them to produce the kind of record amounts of oil that we saw produced in 2019. But you do want to see that number go up. Those are jobs. That activity produces economic activity elsewhere in the economy, and that production means more money coming back to local communities, roads and parks and libraries. So we've had coronavirus that we've been dealing with, Russia and Saudi Arabia, and state rulemakings on top of all of this. So before Jared Polis and the Democrats swept into office in 2018, we already had among the most rigorous rules in the country. Many people have heard me say many times, many first of their kind in the nation rules were already in existence here in Colorado, protecting our air, protecting our water, protecting surfaces. Before Jared Polis and the Democrats took over in 2018, we had already had a dozen rulemakings over the preceding 8 years, but that wasn't enough, and they wanted to do more, and so they passed Senate Bill 181, which they said would give local governments new authority to regulate oil and gas. And I think Commissioner Kirkmeyer probably has a few thoughts on that and how that local authority has been extended to them or not. It also set into motion a series of rulemakings that are still taking place and ultimately are going to take about 2 years from the time the bill was signed until it is complete. We immediately saw some short-term impacts and some job losses because of Senate Bill 181 and low commodity prices in 2019. I think it's probably smart to say the true impact won't be known for some time, as it's going to take multiple years for this to implement, and that you need a dozen rules to be written and updated. That takes time, and we want them to take time because you want them to get it right. This is a highly technical industry, and you don't want to rush those things, but those rules then have to be implemented, and that takes time as well. So what you have is uncertainty, and when you're not sure what the rules are or what they're going to be, it creates uncertainty in the marketplace. And suddenly you begin to see companies holding back on long-term investments. You see outside investment capital questioning whether or not to invest in Colorado. And that's certainly not a place we want to be as Coloradans. We want to be open for business. We want people to be able to invest in our state. So 181 projected a certain lack of certainty, in large part because it still needs to be completed. The commission has updated some rules, wellbore integrity rules, flow line rules, but the biggest rulemaking and biggest changes, what they're calling mission change, is still going to take place this fall, August through October. So not only does that increase uncertainty, but all those rules add to the cost of doing business in Colorado, which is something that you don't often hear about or talk about, but it's really, really important. We should be concerned at any time when you're adding to the cost of doing business, but especially when you're in a depressed market or in a time of recession. So all this to say is that the industry has been battling on several fronts: the pandemic, the price war between Saudis and Russia, state rulemakings, and I haven't even mentioned those keep it in the ground activists that kind of rear their heads and try to put things on the ballot. Fortunately, we're not going to be facing a ballot fight in 2020. That is a bit of good news that's out there. But I will kind of close with this, Sandra. I know I've been talking for quite a bit. I think we talk about uncertainty, but there are three things that I think I know with a fairly good degree of certainty. And one is that this is a resilient industry. Our energy workers have gotten really good at producing this essential resource at a lower cost. And we have faced serious challenges before. And if I got to place a bet, I'm going to bet on the men and women who work in this industry in Colorado and across the country. They will rise to the occasion. The other thing I know is that the world will need oil and gas for years to come. The demand for energy will continue to grow as the population grows, as we begin to come out of this pandemic. And there's no effective replacement for us right now. So the world's going to need oil and gas. The third truth and the third thing that I know is that there are few places on the planet, if any, that are producing this resource cleaner, better, or safer than in Colorado. So under those rules we talked about, under all the technology and innovation that's happening out in the workforce, our companies are utilizing state-of-the-art technology to decrease emissions, to reduce leaks, to limit venting and flaring, and to disturb less land. So the end result is abundant, efficient, affordable energy that's done cleaner, safer than anywhere on the planet. So as demand comes back, and it will, as capital begins to come back, we need to be prepared to help power Colorado out of this recession. Our companies will be focusing on sort of those long-term fundamentals, knowing there's a long-term need for oil and gas, knowing that our country needs ample supplies. We want to have energy security. We don't want to rely on other countries for our energy, and knowing that we're producing it here cleaner, safer, and better than anywhere. So I think there's a real opportunity here for Colorado to really set itself apart and to make sure that we're focusing on doing it at a lower cost, certainly than we've done it before, but also to make sure that resource is cleaner and safer and better than ever before. So I'll end it at that.
Oh, that's good. That sets us up and my back. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Sets this up as well for the conversation. And my apologies. I don't know if that's me or someone else, but anyway.
It's breaking up a little.
Yeah, strange. My apologies. I'm going to pass it over to Barb. I'll figure out the technical pieces, but Barb needs a little introduction to those in the Northern Colorado region. But for those who don't know Barb, she has been the Weld County Commissioner in District 3 since 2008, but previously served as a commissioner from 93 to 2001. So she has long represented and understands Weld County and the state of Colorado. She also served in Governor Owen's cabinet as executive director of the Department of Local Affairs, and is presently a candidate for Colorado Senate District 23 and just won her primary election, and will face a general election, but looking forward to that unfolding. Barb is a graduate of the University of Colorado, of which she is very proud, and is also very proud of her wonderful grandsons as well. But she is one of the most stalwart advocates for oil and gas, and wanted her to share perspectives on Weld County's contribution to the region and to Colorado, and the interconnect again of the importance of the economics of the industry to the state. Thank you, Barb, for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate being here. My phone was kind of going in and out, so hopefully we don't lose me here as I'm speaking. But so agree with Dan's points. I think he made some really good points, but from a more local level, and for those of you who don't remember, oil and gas is extremely important to the state of Colorado, but it's also extremely important to Weld County. About 90% of the oil production in the state is within Weld County in the DJ Basin, and about 40% of the gas production is within Weld County. So it's huge for not just the county, but also our special districts, our municipalities, Ames Community College, those types of things, any taxing entity. And certainly the number of jobs that are associated with that, which we've been very concerned about over the course of the last 6 months or so of what's been going on within the industry. So the state, our Democrat legislature and our Democrat governor like to keep blaming the challenges that the state are facing with regard to their budget because of COVID-19, when in reality, it's quite frankly, in my mind, and I think if they actually go back and look and you look at the numbers, it's based on Senate Bill 181. The number of permits that have been approved by the COGCC, the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, in 2019 dropped by over 60%. We anticipated in Weld County when we were putting together our budgets and things that they would drop by about 40% because that would be consistent as to what happened in 2008, happened, in other years as well, happened as we've gone through it, over the course of the last 10 years, we've anticipated drop-offs every time there's been this major sweeping change. But the comments that I made in testimony in Senate Bill 181 about there being these sweeping regulatory changes and what it would do and impact oil and gas and how it would impact not only Weld County's budget and the entities within Weld County, but the state budget, unfortunately have all come true, and it's worse than what we anticipated. So in Weld County right now, because of the drop in permits and because of the price war that occurred in, as Dan spoke of, between Saudi Arabia and Russia, we are anticipating at least a 35% drop off in production just this year alone in 2020. And in 2021, we're anticipating that there will be a 50% drop in production. As we all know with oil and gas, or I'm assuming you all know, I shouldn't say that, but as you may or may not know, oil and gas, basically the tax impacts and the revenue impacts from the taxes, you don't really feel for about an 18 to 24 month period. So while it looks like, in 2020, our revenues went up, our property tax revenues went up with regard to oil and gas, that's essentially based on what was going on 2 years ago or 18 months ago within the industry and within Weld County. So we're not going to really feel, and the state isn't going to truly feel the impacts of the drop in oil and gas probably until at least 2021 and even more harshly in 2022. So when they're talking about the recession that they've entered in and they try and say it's from COVID-19, again, it's really because of the drop off in oil and gas, in those permits, and then in the number of jobs that have been lost because of the number of oil and gas rigs that have laid down. I mean, you heard what Dan said. So it's going to be and continue to be a huge issue for the state of Colorado, not so much Weld County because we're pretty fiscally prudent in our county. And, we plan in a strategic way, unlike the state of Colorado, and we're prepared for, ups and downs. I see you smiling, Dan Haley, for the ups and downs that occur in oil and gas, because we prepare for those. But the state has not, because basically they like to tax and spend. So last year during Senate Bill 181, myself and my assessor, Brenda Donez, we told every single committee about what we felt was going to happen with regard to the Gallagher Amendment and the residential assessment ratio. And we told them last year that if everything goes the way that we believe it's going to go, with at least a 40% drop off in permitting, which will result in at least a 30% drop off in production come 2021, that there would be at least a 9% reduction in tax revenues across the state for any local government entity that relies on property taxes. Well, lo and behold, it's not 9%, it's actually more like 18%. Thank you to everything that's been going on. But that started way before COVID. COVID is just exasperating the issue. But quite frankly, what they did with Senate Bill 181, and then you add on the price war, which I can't blame on the legislature or the governor. I'd like to, but I can't. When you put those two things together, that's why we're seeing this huge drop in property tax revenues that will be hitting these local governments, certainly not so much this year, but certainly next year. So, the state's answer to that is, well, let's just increase people's taxes by repealing Gallagher. And I know from a business perspective, people think repealing Gallagher might be a good thing, but from a residential perspective, it is not. The residential rate will stay up high instead of dropping like it's supposed to drop. Therefore, it's an increase in taxes. And quite frankly, the reason the state needs to do that is because they have to backfill school districts. It's not because the state collects property tax revenue. That's not their issue. It's because school districts collect property tax revenues. And when the school district's property tax revenues drop, it's up to the state to have to backfill that. So I think this year where they're realizing at the state a $3 billion plus, $3.5 billion plus drop, in revenues, that they had to figure out some cuts, which they need to go get their pencils back out and get that budget back out and start doing some more cuts, because that's what's going to continue to happen when they start realizing even further drops in tax revenues because of the oil and gas. The other problem that the state is going to be facing, and to some extent Weld County will as well, but again, we prepare for these types of things, is, typically what pulls this state out of recessions, like in 2001 and 2008, are three things. There are three things that pull this state out, the three big budget economic drivers. They are oil and gas, it is agriculture, and it is tourism. And typically it is oil and gas and agriculture that pulls this state out of recessions. It's not necessarily tourism. They're not going to have oil and gas to help pull this state out of recession anytime soon because of what they did with Senate Bill 181. So I think you've heard everybody, they need to tighten their belts. Well, they better tighten their belts some more and start figuring out what they're going to do, because we're not coming out of this anytime soon because of what they've done through Senate Bill 181. The other things that are going on in the state, as Dan said, more regulations than rigs. What a sad commentary, but that's very true. So the state right now is in the process of developing regulations with regard to local governments and essentially how they can usurp local government authority and going in direct conflict with what's in the state, what's in state law, which was what was in Senate Bill 181. I know everybody didn't embrace local control. I know the governor thought, well, county wouldn't embrace local control. Lo and behold, we're the only county who has actually adopted the 1041 regulations, which is a delegation of state authority to local governments. We did that because we felt that we were trying to bring about as much stability and certainty as we could in the permitting process, and quite frankly, set up the oil and gas industry into a vested right situation, a vested property rights situation, by coming through and getting a permit on the surface through Weld County. When they receive that permit, they have vested their private property rights on the surface, which helps give them at least something to use back against the state at some point. We're hopeful in Weld County that they would do that. But quite frankly, right now, the state COGCC is in the process of trying to usurp local control by saying that they have control over not only location, but also setbacks, an alternate, analysis, those types of things, which we don't believe they do in Weld County. So we will be fighting that rule. We went through some pretty stringent air quality evaluations over the course of the last year since Senate Bill 181, and have hired our own air quality experts, have them on board to figure out what's going on. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about Belo Romero. Quite frankly, what the state first put out back in December was inaccurate. They did it, in my mind, as a political stunt just to scare people, which I find despicable. But they have now come back and stated in their numbers through the state health department that, quite frankly, 500 feet is good enough to protect, is what it should be, or should it be at least, to protect health, welfare, and safety. People's health and safety within a 500-foot setback is sufficient. That is what Weld County is working to within our rules and regulations. Certainly, if the oil and gas operators want to have more than a 500-foot setback, they certainly can. Part of our concern in Weld County, as important as oil and gas is to the county, agriculture as well. We're #1 in agriculture. That's also important to the county. And both of these industries have figured out how to coexist over the last 20 years. We don't want to disrupt that. We want to ensure that they both can coexist. They both are important to Weld County, but they're both important economies to the state of Colorado, because over 1/4 of the agricultural economy is grown and raised in Weld County. So we need to protect both of those industries, and that's what we are aiming to do, and providing that stability and certainty as much as we possibly can for the oil and gas industry. So we will be at the rulemaking in August when that comes up. We've already been putting in our forms and our issues and our pre-hearing documents, that type of thing. And we look forward to basically taking on the state again. We assume they're just going to ignore us in our comments with regard to their rulemaking, their 300 series. But in this case, typically counties can't sue the state because we're an arm of state government. But in this case, if they don't follow their own administrative procedures and if they break the law, we have every authority to go and take that to court to challenge their rules, and we are preparing to do so. So that's where we're at in Weld County. There's a lot still going on. We would hope, as Dan said, we do find that the oil and gas industry, they are a very resilient industry. They do know how to navigate rulemaking, additional rulemaking. They're very innovative, and they've done a lot of things over the course of the last 20, 30 years with regard to drilling operations. They're very health conscious. When people say that they aren't environmentally friendly, I think they're probably more environmentally friendly than any other industry there is out there, and probably more so than some of those environmental activist folks. So, we have a lot of faith in the industry. Hopefully they have a lot of faith in us, and we'll figure out how to get through this working together. And so that's where we're at in Weld County.
Thank you, Barb. That was fantastic and actually a great segue to Doug Dennison to talk a little bit in more detail about the company side of the equation, the operators, those who are every day in the field delivering for Colorado and for this country and the like. So Doug is the is the Director of Community Affairs for High Point Resources. Prior to that, he was with the Bill Barrett Corporation as their Environmental and Government Affairs Liaison. Doug serves on the board of the Northern Colorado Legislative Alliance for the last couple of years, and so appreciate his insights and perspectives that he shares with us on a monthly and bi-monthly basis when we're meeting during the session. And thank you, Doug, so much for sharing your perspectives.
You bet. Thanks, Sandra. Excuse me, my allergies kind of kicked up this morning, so my voice is cracking a little bit.
You have all the hay behind you. There's no wonder.
Well, yeah, maybe I should turn that picture off and I'd feel better. You know, I just as some background on High Point Resources. We're a fairly new company, but one with long roots in Colorado. High Point was formed just a couple of years ago when Bill Barrett Corporation and Fifth Creek Energy merged. So we're not a new player. We've been in Colorado for many years, been in the DJ for close to 10 years now. We are a Denver-based company with offices in Greeley and Hereford. If you've never been to Hereford, we have an office there. And we are 100% Colorado, 100% Weld County operators. So we're very invested in what's going on at the state level and in Weld County. And, you know, I've talked to Commissioner Kirkmeyer and other commissioners, and, you know, we fully support everything that they're doing to push back on the state, trying to usurp the local governments from having their siting authority. And we'll be right there with them during the rulemaking and fighting with the COGCC. I guess I have a little bit of a more optimistic view of things than the last time we had one of these panel sessions a few months ago. You know, we are seeing prices slowly creep up. We've been bouncing around the $40 a barrel mark for the last few weeks. I don't know a lot about marketing oil and gas. If you don't know anything about that, that's a very technical and very complex process. But I did talk to one of our marketers this morning just to get a perspective on how things are looking. Because, you know, in addition to the price issues and COVID and everything else, as the demand fell, we had the other problem. We had no place to send oil. If you followed the news, all the storage in the country was full. The refineries were cutting back because there just wasn't a demand for the products. We had tankers sitting offshore full of oil with no place to unload it. The good news is some of that has been relieved. Our chief marketer told me this morning that Cushing, Oklahoma, which is the big storage facility that much of our oil in this country goes to before it goes to the refineries, has plenty of space now. There's a metric that they use to kind of gauge what's going on at Cushing called the CMA differential. And he said back in April, May, when things were really bad, that differential rose to about $6.80 a barrel. But the projection now for August is that it's dropped down to 17 cents a barrel. So you can just see based on the dramatic decrease in that differential, that's just an indication of how much storage is available in Cushing. The storage issue seems to be solved, so that, you know, if we're producing oil, we now have a place to sell it and send it. Just as kind of some history, what's happened this year is both Dan and Barb talked about when all of this started happening earlier this year, companies started cutting back on capital spending, and we're no different than other companies. We laid down our drilling rigs, cut all of our completion crews out for the foreseeable future, just because we didn't know where things were going. You know, we've had internal layoffs, as many other companies have. We've had salary reductions, just taking every step we can to just try to survive this environment. The unfortunate thing is that many of our vendors and subcontractors are the ones that really get hit the hardest because we contract most of the work that we do. And so if we're not drilling wells or completing wells, there's a whole lot of contract employees that don't have a job. And maybe Jack can speak to that when he talks, but it's been a tough situation all around. I have not heard yet that we are going to add a rig before the end of the year, but I wouldn't be surprised if we do, if things continue the way they're going. But as Dan and Barb both spoke to very well, the wild card is the regulatory environment. We just don't know what this rulemaking is going to look like when it's completed later this fall. I would hope that folks at the COGCC and within the governor's administration recognize that this is not the time to keep kicking the oil and gas industry because we're just about kicked out. I guess that's the way to say it. It's tough, and you're also seeing a potential ballot initiative to increase severance taxes. I saw an article today that COGCC wants to increase the mill levy that they charge on our production to support their operations. So it's just this continual needling to eat away at our industry that's making it very difficult. I think we can survive the price issues, and hopefully as the world gets back to work, the demand for the products that we produce will continue to increase. But the regulatory and fiscal environment in Colorado is going to be the tough one for us to all overcome.
Yeah. Thank you, Doug. So appreciate that perspective and sort of on the ground company perspective and the difficult decisions you all have to make on a daily basis to just stay in the game. And as a Colorado only based company, as you point out, the impact of the policy regulatory decisions are essential to you and to your colleagues. So thank you for that. Moving on to Rich Werner, who is the president and CEO of Upstate Colorado. Rich also serves on our board as actually a contributing one of the members. Upstate Colorado is one of the member organizations of the NCLA, and Rich serves on our board as well. He has been with Upstate since March of 2015, and prior to that was with the Pueblo Economic Development Corporation for several years. And we benefit from his relationships down in Pueblo because, of course, the president of the Senate is from Pueblo and the chair of the Joint Budget Committee is from Pueblo. So we're so grateful to have the relationships that he has there that work for us as well. Really appreciate your joining us today, Rich, and look forward to your thoughts with regard to the economic landscape.
Sure, thank you. As everyone has been talking here, I also realized that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about unemployment. Apparently the state is doing its part to add jobs because I think now they have more paid commissioners on the GOCC than we have rigs. So not only is there more rulemaking, but there certainly is more staff to, adjudicate those 5 rigs. But in seriousness, talking about what's happened over the past year, if we look back to the end of 2019, you will see some, natural unemployment numbers as it relates to the industry. I think it was a little surprising as we started to look at the impacts of this rulemaking. There was a 31-month period going back to like 2017 of continued job growth in the industry. And when that was snapped back in the November time range, we all were like, wow, there's 300 jobs that this industry has lost. Now we look from March on and we've lost about over 5,000 jobs. So yes, COVID has exacerbated this situation, but it didn't necessarily create it. And so when we look at the job impacts specific to our region, we have to look at that holistically and understand in the basic world of economics that when someone brings home a paycheck, they spend that paycheck in a community. And your economic models will tell you that every dollar in a community will circulate about 4 times before it leaves a community. So as Doug had mentioned, it's not just the direct employees, but it's the indirect employees. It's the indirect businesses that are highly affected by some of these downturns. The reality of what I think we're up against right now is, in one sense, the good news is that oil is a commodity and it's in the ground and it's not going anywhere. Right? So we know at some point the industry is going to rebound, but as companies are making immediate decisions on where to invest their resources, they are going to take the path of least resistance. So our concern as economic developers is when you have companies that have operations nationally, they're going to invest their money in areas that may not have the regulatory uncertainty that Colorado is creating. And so that just exasperates the situation we're in now. When we look at the unemployment numbers, as I mentioned, we're up over 5,000 since March. And getting those people back to work then will create the auxiliary benefits to the other industries that have been affected by COVID that are really on the margin, whether it be your restaurants. You know, we've seen significant reductions in several different service industries. And I was on a call earlier today in which there was some information that came down from the feds that said businesses with under 10 employees, that traditional small business, could literally be subject to be going out of business in a range of about 60%, which is a pretty dramatic number. And when you look at the revenues that are created and municipalities rely on, approximately 67% of those revenues come from those service industries, come from sales tax, come from those things. And then for those of you who know me and have heard me speak about oil and gas before, one thing I always like to bring up is a program that started many years ago through the state, using oil and gas revenues through DOLA to grant money to municipalities to help with additional projects. And so when you look at how the oil and gas industry supports the overall economy, just in March alone, we saw $30 million given out to various communities for projects like road improvements, for water treatment plants. Oh, and by the way, for clean air, energy and renewable projects and initiatives. All of these things are paid for through the production revenues that go to the state of Colorado. So I expect you're going to immediately see a loss in that program that is going to not only affect standard municipal needs, but also all of the renewable initiatives that the state is perpetuating. So it's all very cyclical. And you know, at the end of the day, every job matters. Every job that's lost is a paycheck lost. So as we go, and I know Dan said we all kind of took a breath when we said, oh, I think we're going to be okay on ballot initiatives. I think the more that we can press upon the rulemaking that's coming up and really at least get that settled, not that it will ever be settled, but we've got to understand that every one of these dollars affects state programs, it affects the county in their tax revenues, and ultimately affects those municipalities. So with that, I'll just zip it and move on to Jen.
No, the perspective is so important because, right, the ripple effect of all of this is critical, and each of you have touched on that. And I think what's most interesting is those continued policies that harm the industry. We have this corresponding increase in preference, if you will, from some of the leadership around renewable energy, but the renewable energy's ability to replace that lost income is non-existent. And I think what we're finding is there's hopefully becoming some understanding of that eventuality. The effect that oil and gas has on the industry side is really, really key. So, or at least that's part of the, we need to continue to emphasize that point. So thank you for that perspective. Jack Hamlin is our last panelist. And Jack is the Vice President of the Energy Strong, in addition to his role as Vice President of Sargent Lundy, which is a new role for him after they acquired his firm, Summit Engineering Services, as he served as President, I believe CEO as well. But Energy Strong, they bring the perspective of the professionals within the oil and gas sector as they've worked over the last several years to unify that voice on this very topic. So Jack, thank you so much for joining us and appreciate your perspective. Jack, let's see. You there, Jack? I don't know. Let's see. Okay. Well, maybe he isn't joining us. I'll send him a note to flag us when he's.
Can you hear?
Yeah, we can.
Can you hear me? There we go. Sorry about that. Yeah. So thanks. So great intro. I'll kind of follow up with a at the end of my topic here. Follow up with a little bit more on Energy Strong. Great to follow the speakers in being in the fight for the last year and a half. We could all agree that if we could clone Barb 1,000 times, we'd probably be in pretty good shape or better shape. So he's just been a fierce advocate. And really what Energy Strong has tried to do, and why it was founded, was there was three kind of major points in the oil and gas industry that we observed through initially Prop 112 and then through Senate Bill 181. And as we all kind of faced the commodity swings and the industry was tough enough, you had all these kind of externalities affecting it, mostly political. And it was really jarring because every political candidate, including president, that's ever run in my lifetime ran on energy independence for America. And so there's this unprecedented pride in our industry that we have that we're doing something good. And now the narrative is that we're doing something bad. So with that comes, Energy Strong is trying to create awareness. A lot of times the feedback that we're getting from our members is that oil and gas as an industry is fairly tribal. There's a lot of different groups and segments and everybody's compartmentalized, but there doesn't seem to be an awareness of the fight that we're even in, which is more of a social media, people on Nextdoor, people on Facebook, chattering about the industry, spreading mistruths and rumors and anecdotal data that just simply isn't true, but there's really nothing there to counter that narrative. And we've all been on social media and it gets just nasty. I mean, right away, it's hard to have a dialogue or an informational conversation because the discourse just isn't there. So the first thing with Energy Strong was just a common place for anybody, whether you were in oil and gas, a peripheral industry like an insurance company or restaurant, or even a user of natural gas or oil, which we all are, to be there and to educate and advocate and learn from one another. So that was kind of the first point that we had, and the feedback that we got was just that oil and gas seems to be in a fight they don't even know they're in, and we're kind of using tactics that are antiquated and losing ground every day, right? And there's a myriad of reasons for that. Second, which has already been touched on, was that businesses just don't invest in uncertainty, and now we've got this black swan event of multiple events of uncertainty. And so with that, we're trying to mobilize people. It seems like throughout all of the legislative hearings, I attended a lot of them, never done that before in my life, but went to see what it was about, learned a ton. But it seemed that the people with most to lose had the least to say. We would show up to these town hall meetings and events at the state capitol, and there was hardly any pro oil and gas, pro American, kind of domestic energy presence there. It was, people in that community that were concerned that were really rallying against the industry with very little kind of objection. So we'd like to try to mobilize people, and we have been mobilizing people to various events pre-COVID. I imagine a lot of those events will be taken online, which could be a real advantage for the industry if we can get, by and large, I think the industry and the feedback we get is people just want to go to work. They don't want to go down to the Capitol or town hall meeting at 7 p.m. They're tired. They want to feed their families, etc. I think if it moves to an online presence and we can unify the industry and consumers to attend these events online, we should be able to make some more traction. And then some more feedback we've gotten. Point number 3 is that there's a sentiment that oil and gas really needs to get on the offensive. We're always on the defensive. If there's a ballot initiative, we're reacting. We're running commercials. We're reaching out to communities, but it doesn't seem to happen as much, of course, in non-election years or when there's not a real fight to fight. And so we kind of see it as this really unprecedented opportunity to unify the industry, band together, and kind of continue or create a marketing, an educational, and an engagement type campaign. Me personally, I think the oil and gas industry as a whole does a terrible job of marketing. I went to school at UNC, graduated with a business degree, studied marketing, and it's just non-existent in our industry or very close to it. And we really need to find a way to kind of touch with the common person on what the impacts are to the industry, what the potential implications of rising costs and increased regulations are. Anybody that knows me knows I'm a huge proponent. I believe we should be exporting this model, the model that for oil and gas production that we do here in Colorado. We should be exporting this globally, not banning it. The whole industry is rooted in science and technology, but the perception often is that it's environmentally damaging and reckless and all that. So those are kind of the 3 main things that we see as needing addressed here moving into 2020 and beyond. Our Facebook feed, there's 40,000 members or so, and it's become a job board anymore. It's kind of sad to see. It went from educational people getting together learning to help me feed my family and find work. So there's a lot of problems, a lot of headwinds we face. Yes, the industry is resilient. However, there are states that border us that are much friendlier, and what we've seen from our side, being an engineering provider for the company I work for, is that we're seeing a lot more work pick up in Texas and Wyoming than we are in Colorado. So yes, we're resilient, but those people will travel. So the real solution here is to address these head on, and we feel get a little more aggressive in tactics.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate your insights, Jack, and really the impact upon the everyday person in the industry is really important for everyone's consideration as we look towards the resiliency of the industry. You touched on sort of messaging, and I know that Dan and his team have done a ton of work in this regard. And I don't know, Dan, if you had any comment on response to some of that which Jack posed with regard to the communication out. Let's see.
There. Yeah, perfect. Couple thoughts actually. One, I would say that we have, for a long time, we were really behind the 8 ball and didn't do nearly enough. We did not go out into those communities where we were working and explain what we were doing, why we were doing it, why it was important, why it was good for Colorado, why it was good for our communities and our country. I think we've gotten a lot better at it in recent years, but there's always more that we can do. I think there's more that we can do on the K-12 front, and making sure that we're getting ahead of these issues and talking to those next generations of Americans about why this is an important industry. I think that we have been behind the 8 ball on climate change and messaging there, and talking about how we have really good things to say about how we're part of the solution if you're concerned about the climate and the great things that we're doing in this industry. And to Jack's point, we often do, we're back on our heels quite a bit when you're in a state with more than 20 rulemakings in the past decade. You're focused on those things and not so much on those important things of getting out and having those conversations. So there's always more that we can do from an industry level, and we should be doing more because it's very important. We have the facts on our side. We have science on our side. We need to be out not only telling those stories, but telling the emotional stories of the employees who work in this industry, who feed their families, who keep our economy afloat, and making sure that people understand that, and all the things that you need oil and gas for, the products that you need. You look at just dealing with the coronavirus and COVID-19, what the world would be like if you didn't have single-use plastics in medical facilities. Things that, you know, we're able to survive in the 21st century because we have an oil and gas-based economy and modern society because of oil and gas. There's plenty of those good stories that we need to tell, and we absolutely need to be out there telling it and getting out in front of this thing and being unabashed about it, being unashamed of the work that our operators and our members do in Colorado and across the country to produce this resource. As I said, cleaner, better than ever. And again, I'll go back to some comments I made early. In Colorado, we have a real great story here about the clean energy that we're producing. We have on our website, you go to koga.org/fact sheets, look for something called the Colorado Molecule. We just put it up a couple weeks ago. We went through and we looked at all, you know, across the country, across the world, and we really believe this is one of the cleanest molecules of energy produced anywhere on the planet. We should be proud of that, and we should be talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Appreciate that perspective. And right, the story is really important, and I know you feel as if you're running uphill in that regard, but stick with it. And I think partnership with those who are in the field, it makes a whole lot of sense. And I know you and Energy Strong are well connected. I wanted to touch on, Doug Dennison mentioned it, and that is the COGCC is contemplating, actually has proposed rules to increase the mill levy upon the industry at this point in time, and be curious anyone's thoughts with regard to that. And the timing is certainly an interesting one given the circumstance, but I'd be curious those who might have some thoughts on that.
Anyone?
Anyone? Barb?
There you go. Well, I would say it's the absolute worst time to sit here and try and figure out how to do an increased tax on oil and gas. I think it goes back to, again, my comments with the state doesn't understand the value of oil and gas to their economy and what it means to that state budget. I just think it's a bad time, and I think they should probably rethink that idea, but I'm sure they won't.
Yeah, I suspect as well.
Couldn't say it
I mean, they're trying to pass Gallagher, let's face it, you know, and increase taxes on residential property owners so that they don't have to cut the taxes anymore, or try and not cut, you know, revenues at the state budgeting process. So I don't think they understand their state budget that well, and I just don't have a whole lot of faith in them at this point.
I think the state, you know, clearly as the regulated entity, we want to make sure that there's confidence in the regulator and that they have the positions they need. But I think they need to explain to fee payers, to the taxpayers, which is in this case is the oil and gas industry, what they've done to tighten their belt, where they've been able to save positions, all the things that the rest of us have to do. They also are going to have a rulemaking coming up early next year on fees and increasing fees on industry. And so, you know, they're going to come back to the same source again for dollars. And there are a couple ways you can raise money. You can incentivize the work that we're doing here and try to get more of something, and then you get more tax dollars in, or you can keep raising the fees and taxes on any industry or any business to try to get more money out of them that way. And I don't think that necessarily works, and that the better way is to try to incentivize and create more of a product or more of, you know, grow a business and get more tax dollars in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Would agree. Speaking of tax dollars, we had a question come specific to Barb. What is Weld County expecting the decrease in output to translate to in terms of decreased sales tax for FY21? So sort of the out year expectation on revenue side.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra. I saw that question pop up. So Weld County, we don't have a county sales tax, so we don't go through and put those projections in place. you'd probably be better off asking like Roy Otto with the city of Greeley what they're anticipating and drop in sales tax revenues. And, you know, part of that, most of that will probably be with regard to COVID, quite frankly, and the sales tax revenue. But in property tax revenues, we're anticipating in Weld County alone that we will need to cut $50 million out of our budget with regard to just property tax revenues. So that's just Weld County, which means across the county, every local government, including your fire districts and, you know, water districts and sanitation districts, school districts, will be cutting from their you know, budgets as well because of the property tax revenue and the drop that's occurred just in 2020. So we won't have all those numbers though until probably end of August, September. The assessor and you know, Brenda and Don Warden, who's our finance director, we start putting those numbers together in end of August, September timeframe.
Very good. Perfect. Thank you. Sort of back to the communication piece, certainly a tool that can be used to educate voters as independent expenditure committees. And Tom Norton had asked, do you all support the utilization, and how can we, and I'll add, how can we better utilize that tool to educate voters? Maybe that's a question for Dan, because I know you're involved in that.
Yes, I think we're open to any and all tools to educate voters right now. Some of our operators started something called the Coloradans for Responsible Energy Development several years ago. It's a separate entity from GOGA whose focus is educating, so a lot of dollars do go there, but I think we should be open to any and all outlets to get that information out there into the public. And again, really try to figure out not only the message that we want to get out there, but what audiences need to hear this. I think we live in a society where we too often get entrenched in our own camps. And as we provide more information, people get further entrenched in their camps. But I do believe there are people that can be, you know, that want more information, that want to support this industry, want to find out more about it, and really can be supporters if we just find a way to make sure they're getting that information, that we're open and accessible and transparent about what we're doing.
Yeah.
Well, and I would just like to add to that. I mean, it's proven that it works. I mean, I was on CRED, Coloradans for Responsible Drilling or Education or whatever it was now. And we were able to move the needle. I mean, that's when you saw all of those commercials that were coming out that talked about what is fracking, because so many people didn't even understand what fracking was. So once you were able to educate folks and give them that background and show them the facts and show them that it is not damaging their health and how this is a industry that is environmentally friendly, it works. So yeah, I would be completely in support of something of that nature.
One of the things I would say on that, and I will try and be as tactful as possible here, is as you see these messages come out, sometimes it's not the message, it's the messenger. And to diversify that voice, I think, is critical. Dan, you guys do a great job. CRED has done a great job. But you're seen as industry spokesmen. And sometimes when we look and have to really truly identify the impact, as you said, on some of these taxing entities that's going to come down the pike, to be able to diversify that message from a wider audience of affected people, I think is really important going forward.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And we are industry spokespeople. And so we do need people to stand up and say, this is an important industry to what we're trying to do in Colorado, and really talk about it from that environmental perspective. And again, the need for energy security, all these different messages that are out there that I think should resonate with everybody. We have a society that's being fed a bill of goods and being told that we can flip to a renewable future tomorrow if we want, if we just had the political will to do it. And so people believe that, you know, we're somehow holding them back. The technology does not exist. You need this product. And I think it's important for people to understand that. And so if we need the product, then how are we going to produce it cleaner, better, and safer, like we're doing here in Colorado? And so it's helpful when you've got those third-party validators standing up and saying, this is something that we need in our community. And we need these jobs. And these jobs, as you pointed out, Rich, for every one job created in oil and gas, 2 or 3 are created elsewhere in the economy to either support that job or because that job exists. That's an important thing that's not being replaced right now in Colorado. So we need to figure out how we can get them back and how we can talk about that as a community as a whole.
Yeah. That's a perfect sort of endpoint, and I'll leave you all with this. Of course, to your point, Rich, about third-party spokespeople. The Northern Colorado Legislative Alliance is a representative of the business community and the economy at large, and we've been proud to be partnered with the industry because we understand its importance and its relevance to the overall ecosystem in Northern Colorado, but of course it extends to Colorado as a whole. Debbie Brown has joined us. She's with Colorado Business Roundtable. She asked, how can we be helpful? And it's true. The opportunity for the larger business community to be engaged in this topic is really relevant. And we're proud to be partners and to be advocates and supporters of the industry as an organization. I want to thank all of you for joining us today and sharing your perspective, so important to the larger dialogue occurring across Colorado about our current economic situation, and really appreciate all those who attended to listen in to the conversation, and really respect each of you so much, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sandra.
Thanks.